Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gwendolyn Mason, and I am the Acting Associate Superintendent in the Office of Teaching, Learning, and Schools for the Office of Special Education. I'm delighted that you're joining us this afternoon for this presentation on compensatory recovery services for students with disabilities. I want to thank you so very much as we begin this presentation for all of the work that you do each and every day to address the needs of students with disabilities in our school system. I want to thank you also for the work you did last spring to begin these discussions around this very important topic, because we know the impact of the closure of schools and what it has had on our students' ability to learn and to make progress. To support me in today's presentation, I am joined by several wonderful Office of Special Education staff members. They include Brenda Brown, my assistant as the associate in the Office of Special Education, Jonathan Langston, who is in a new role as the Compensatory Recovery Services Coordinator, Julie Hall, who is the Director of the Office of Business, Fiscal, and Information Systems, Philip Lynch, who is the Director of the Department of Special Education Services, and the newest member in the Office of Special Education is Diana Wiles. She is the new Supervisor for the Resolution and Compliance Unit. I want you to know that today's session will be recorded. It is being recorded because we want you to benefit in your own time, having the opportunity to learn and to review the information that's been shared. In addition, I would like for you to know that while you may have many questions, and we plan on answering some of your questions at the conclusion of every segment of this presentation, it is our intent to respond to each and every question, and that information will be posted so you will also have that available to you as a resource. And then finally, there will be many resources that will be referenced throughout this presentation. All of those resources will also be made available to you for future use. So I want to thank you so very much for joining us. And now, as we move to the next slide, I'd like to review with you the outcomes for today. By the end of this session, we will have reviewed the definition of compensatory recovery services. We will have discussed the legal requirements for CRS, reviewed the process for holding CRS meetings and discussions, reviewed the process for analyzing data to make those CRS eligibility decisions. We will also have reviewed the CRS data entry tool that has been developed that will enable us to collect this information for reporting purposes. And then finally, and most importantly, we'll be talking about how to coordinate those CRS services. So at this time, I'm going to transition this discussion to legal foundations. And again, this is Diana Wiles, the new Resolution and Compliance Supervisor. Diana?
Thank you, Dr. Mason. Good evening, everyone. What are compensatory recovery services? The COVID-19 closures that caused the school system to transition to virtual learning for an extended period of time has caused an inevitable negative academic and social and emotional impact on students with disabilities. Because of this, we're required to consider CRS services for students who may have had regression or lost or missed services during the COVID closures. CRS services must be provided outside of the normal school day. Next slide, please. Is there a legal requirement for CRS? The United States Department of Education has mandated that states must consider the impact of the closures on students with IEPs. We must determine if CRS are needed upon the return of normal school operations. This training is to assist the schools in determining whether CRS is appropriate for your students with disabilities who have IEPs. Next slide. Who determines CRS? CRS is a school team decision in collaboration with parents and guardians. The school team is comprised of staff members who are also IEP team members, your case manager, any related service provider, which would be an occupational therapist, physical therapist, speech and language pathologist, counselor, school psychologist, vision teacher, or any other related service provider for our students. The school counselor, the student could also be a part of the team that makes the decision, if appropriate, an administrator or designee, and a central office representative, if applicable. If, for example, a student and parent are represented by an educational advocate, you should contact your special education supervisor for assistance in handling the CRS determination and meeting. Finally, MCPS attorneys may be involved if the student is represented by an attorney. Please reach out to the Office of General Counsel in the event that there is an attorney involved. Next slide. In what venue can the CRS decision be determined? The Office of Special Education has identified 2 ways in which CRS decisions should be determined and articulated to students and families. The first way is through a collaborative discussion with input from all stakeholders. In this case, a case manager would receive information from school-based team members, including any related service providers, counselors, administrators, and would meet and discuss with the parent or guardian, including their input, to make a decision about what CRS services, if any, are appropriate for the student. That decision should be documented on the prior written notice. The second way of making the determination and articulating it is through a duly constituted IEP team meeting. Your IEP team meeting for CRS should be run and handled in the same manner that you would any other IEP team meeting. All appropriate staff should be involved, should provide documentation, and there should be a robust discussion regarding whether or not CRS services are recommended for the student. Please keep in mind that the parent may ask for an IEP team meeting, even if you have decided to work collaboratively with the parent outside of an IEP team meeting. And if the request is made, it should be honored. Next slide, please. Factors to consider in the CRS process. Any student who was enrolled in pre-kindergarten through high school, whether they were in a public school setting or a non-public school, throughout the COVID-19 school closures from March 16, 2020 through June 30th, 2021, are eligible for a discussion and determination regarding CRS. Case managers must send a copy of the parent guardian CRS letter, which should be signed by your school principal, to all parents for whom CRS are being considered. If you have a student who has moved into the district from out of state or from another Maryland county, please contact Mr. Jonathan Langsam so that he can support your team with obtaining the necessary information to make an informed CRS decision or to determine whether the decision has already been made by the previous local educational agency. Next slide, please. At this time, we are going to pause to take a few questions.
Diana, I'm looking at the Q&A and I see that you do have one question that asks whether the requirements associated with CRS are a Montgomery County requirement, a state requirement, or is this a national requirement?
Thank you, Phil. That's an excellent question. So as stated before, the U.S. Department of Education is requiring all school systems to consider whether or not compensatory recovery services are necessary for any school system that closed during COVID-19. As most of you know, most of the Maryland counties were closed between March 16, 2020 through June 2021. So most of the counties are required to determine that, make the same determination as we are in Montgomery County schools. Likewise, states that closed are also required to make that determination.
There's another question that asks whether schools will be or staff will be provided sample letters to send home.
Thank you, Phil. Yes, we will provide a sample letter. I believe that there was a sample letter that was provided last school year in the spring. However, we would ask that you use the new letter that is being revised and updated, and it will be available once the presentation and all of the relevant documents are posted for use by school teams.
And lastly, I'll pull this question out. Someone's asking if they already had the CRS determination discussion last year, do they need to have that discussion again?
If you've already had the discussion and made a determination about CRS last school year, that decision stands. It should have been documented on the prior written notice. There will also be some additional documentation requirements that you will learn about today and other portions of the webinar. So please keep in mind that you may need to do a couple of extra steps to make sure that you're documenting correctly. We are going to take only 3 questions during this portion, and any question that is not responded to, we will follow up in writing. At this time, I'm going.
Go ahead, Diana. I was just want to remind folks, because we had a number of folks who came in late, that we're using the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen for you to ask questions, and we will get to a few at the checkpoints. Go ahead.
Thank you, Phil. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Brenda Brown, who's going to talk to you about how to use data analysis to determine whether CRS is warranted.
You're on mute, Brenda.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to talk about data analysis. The first thing that we really need to think of are the key areas that will allow a school-based team to find a student eligible for CRS. And they're listed in the bullets below. We're looking for regression or an inability for the student to make progress, our inability to provide services or accommodations during virtual instruction, missing services, or 2 types of delays. The first delay is in notifying the parent or guardian of a revision or a modification to the IEP, or a delay in scheduling a meeting to address any parent or guardian disagreement or concerns with the revisions or modifications to the IEP. One thing that is very important for school teams to note is that parent or guardian or student willingness to participate in virtual instruction is not a factor to consider when establishing eligibility for compensatory recovery services. Moving on, all staff members, pre-K teachers, K-5 special educators, and our related service providers will be using these types of generic information sources that are available as applicable. They are report card grades, learning skill grades from report cards, progress on IEP goals, virtual services logs, related service provider logs, student work samples if they still exist, informal observations, any teacher or service provider anecdotal notes, the parent guardian guiding questions, and the Appendix C. Here are the parent guardian guiding questions. These questions are not sent to the parent in advance of or the guardian in advance of the meeting. These are questions that should be asked during the meeting, whether that be a discussion between the case manager and the parents or guardians, or a full IEP team meeting. And so there are 5 questions. They're generic in nature, initially asking the parent or guardian about their student's strengths, interests, or hobbies. If it's applicable for the next several questions, if they feel that their student demonstrated progress in English language arts, and allow them to explain their answer. The 3rd question relates to social, emotional, behavioral skills. And then the 4th question relates to our students who have related services in communication, fine motor or gross motor skills. And then the 5th question is just any additional data that the parent may want to share. I'm going to go back to the presentation. All right. So the purpose of the data collection is to analyze student academic and social emotional progress, or any progress on related services prior to, during, and after the school closures as appropriate. There is an Appendix C that you will also have access to. This was a document you had access to in last year's session. And here is a shot of it now. These are just things to consider when looking at data for the student prior to COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID. I'm going to go back to the presentation now. We do know, however, that for some of our students in pre-kindergarten and maybe even kindergarten, there may be no pre-COVID data, as during COVID was their first school experience. In those cases, please review any data that you have that was gathered during COVID or after the school closures, and any data that you can get from the parent, any data that you can get from any initial standardized assessments, and what you know about a student and their disability and its impact, and the typical rate of growth that you would expect. When we go to the next slides, we are going to go through some specific evidence of learning data points in pre-K through 5th grade by content area that teams can use in order to do the data analysis. In the follow-up to the documents that you will receive links to performance matters by grade level and by content area that you will be able to click on and go directly to the pre, during, and post data that you and your team can use to analyze whether or not a student is applicable for receiving compensatory recovery services. So when we think about our pre-kindergarten students, in pre-K literacy and behavior, you want to take a look at the early learning assessment. That is both in literacy and mathematics, because it assesses those two content areas as well as behavior. There is also the MCPS APPR data, which is the Montgomery County Public Schools Assessment Program Primary Reading Assessment, and the Child Outcome Summary. The first 2 bullets, the ELA and the MCPS APPR, are available on Performance Matters. The Child Outcome Summary, as our pre-K staff are aware, is available on the IEP. On the math side, again, the early learning assessment and the MCPS AP PM, the PM standing for primary math, are the evidence of learning data points that are available for our pre-kindergarten, a range of our pre-kindergarten students that can be analyzed for CRS. And again, the child outcome summary is a part of the child's IEP that you can reference and gain data from. Moving on to the elementary level, we're going to take a look at grades K through 5 literacy, keeping in mind that students may also have additional data, and I will talk about that additional data. In our evidence of learning chart, we do have the assessments that through benchmark, the weekly assessments, the unit assessments, and the interim assessments. Some students had the oral reading records, and then we had the MAP reading fluency for our K through 2 students, and the MAP R for our 3 through 5 students. There is other diagnostic data that is available on Performance Matters or through other data collection sources from the present levels of academic and functional performance in the area of reading for students who participated in the Tier 3 reading interventions. The iReady reading diagnostic, Annie Orton-Gillingham, beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of the year assessments, plus the lesson data that you are keeping, any of the interventions from Really Great Reading being Countdown, Blast, or HD Word, Read Naturally Live, students who are in the iReady reading intervention, and students who may have been in iLit. When we go over to the K through 5 mathematics section, the evidence of learning data are the Eureka Math mid-module assessments and end of module assessments. Some teams created Eureka Math formative assessments that they created and delivered and were on Performance Matters. Not all teams will have this data, so please don't be worried if you don't see that on Performance Matters. There's also the MAP-P and the MAP-M, MAP-P being for our K through 2 students and the MAP-M being for our 3 through 5 students. And again, the iReady math diagnostic that was administered 3 times a year for our students who are in the Tier 3 iReady math intervention is also data that can be used to determine whether or not a student is eligible for compensatory recovery services. Now, for our students pursuing alternate learning outcomes, let's take a look at the data that is available for your students. There was an ALO data tool that was sent out to ALO teachers in the fall, in which you documented in a range of areas, not just literacy and math, where your students were. This is not available on Performance Matters, but I was assured that those data points were uploaded to MOIEP. In addition, Unique Learning Systems has assessments in literacy and mathematics that the students took through the Unique Learning Systems platform, and as well has been uploaded to Performance Matters. And depending upon the level of the student, there are different assessments. So in literacy, students who were determined to be at a level 1 took the picture match. Level 2 and 3 students took the listening comprehension. In writing, level 1 students took the errorless writing assessment, and levels 2 and 3 took the writing probe. And these data are available on Performance Matters. When we move over to the K through 5 math, again, there's the ALO data tool. And then for the math assessments, for level 1, it was number match. That was a ULS, a Unique Learning Systems assessment. Level 2, add and subtract. Level 3, multiply and divide. Our related service providers have a range of data tools provided for them that they have completed on MOIEP. They have their provider logs. They have their quarterly progress on goals. They always consult with teachers. If they have student work samples that they still have from the pandemic, those can be used if it's applicable, and any informal observations. We really appreciate our related service providers in being integral parts of the team, deciding on compensatory recovery services in their area of expertise. Speech language pathologists will have two roles in this process. Speech language pathologists can be the sole service provider and case manager for a student for whom CRS is being considered, as well as one person in a team for whom CRS is being considered. Okay, as we move along, I'm now going to take you through the process of how to use Performance Matters to take a look at whether or not a student might be eligible for compensatory recovery services. As I said before, as a follow-up to this presentation, you will receive links based on grade level and based on content area that will allow you to click through and populate all of the students in your school or on your caseload for related service providers whose data, the evidence of learning data pre, during, and post-COVID will help you to make these decisions. And so here's what you will see. I'm just having screenshots shown to you this evening. So we're going to be taking a look at a current second grader who has IEP goals and objectives in the areas of mathematics calculation and mathematics problem solving. This student was in kindergarten in 2019. So that's when he was in kindergarten. This was pre-COVID. So you will only see this is his marking period 1, kindergarten grade in math, marking period 2, marking period 3. And then there was no marking period 4 grade because that is when COVID hit and schools were closed. Now, during COVID, here we have while we're on online learning, here's his marking period 1 math grade as a first grader, marking period 2, marking period 3, and marking period 4. So that is, the grades as one of the evidence of learning data points that you would consider. This screen now shows his MAP-P performance. This first one here that I'm pointing to is fall 2019-2020, when he was first in kindergarten. Okay, that is his overall score, that is his percentile, and the coloring being red, you know that he is significantly below what is expected at that time. Over here, we now see what his winter score was when he was in kindergarten. Again, we see him in red, and even though his score increased, his percentile rank decreased. It went from an 8 to a 3. That says that he's falling further behind his peers. Now, during COVID, these are his scores in fall when he was in first grade. A 143, percentile rank of 7, a 150, a percentile rank of 1. Okay, that was in the spring of 2021. So these were his scores, fall of 2021, spring of 2021. When he came back to school as a second grader in fall of this year, he scored a 156 and a percentile rank of 7. So we're really beginning to see a picture of this young man who's really struggling to keep up with his peers here. And then the last bit of information that I will show and just kind of talk us through is that we now have over here, we are going to take a look at the Eureka Math scores that were available. There were no Eureka Math scores available for him when he was in kindergarten. However, there were Eureka Math scores available for him during online learning. And these are, these are the percents that he was able to achieve. Okay, so if you were taking a look at this data and analyzing this data, in addition to any of the other data, the present levels of academic and functional performance, the quarterly progress on goals, you would really see that this was a student for whom math, he did not make the typical amount of progress we would expect a student with a disability who had the supports and services that he had. He didn't make that amount of progress that we would expect. And so this kind of data analysis and discussion and looking at all of that data for this student, it would be applicable to really determine that he did not make the appropriate amount or rate of progress, or even some questions of regression as we took a look at some of this data. So he would definitely be a student for whom we would, I believe, consider eligible for compensatory recovery services in the area of math. As we move along, one of the changes from last year is that Appendix B is a requirement. So I'm going to click on Appendix B. And when you get this appendix, it will be in a Google form so that you can make copies for individual students and then complete them. So it's the same form. It's just been updated and changed, So I'm going to go back to the presentation now. So you are required to use Appendix B in order to identify a student requiring compensatory recovery services for all students, whether or not they end up receiving compensatory recovery services or not. After you review the data in Part 2 of Appendix B, you have to decide whether the student was negatively impacted by the pandemic. If all of the participants agree that there was a negative impact, you will complete Parts 3 and 4 of Appendix B, I keep calling it D, I apologize, to identify the services the student will receive. If all of the participants agree that there was no impact on the students, then you would go directly to Part 4 of Appendix B. In both cases, whether the student is identified as requiring compensatory recovery services or not, the team must document the decision on a prior written notice. I am now going to turn it back over to Dr. Mason to speak to the service hour determination for compensatory recovery services.
Thank you very much, Brenda. Now that you have understood the definition of compensatory recovery services, the legal reason why we are required to convene these discussions due to the impact of the pandemic on our students, and now that you understand the various different factors that you can consider when making a determination regarding compensatory recovery services, the one last question that you probably has is, how do I determine the number of hours to provide a student? How do I determine how many hours to recommend for a student who has in fact demonstrated through a variety of data sources, including Performance Matters and the other data sources that were referenced, to support whether or not the student needs X number of hours in reading or an X number of hours in mathematics or related service or social emotional needs. And so as you think of it in these terms, prior to the pandemic, You were working diligently each and every day to serve students with disabilities. And when you did so, you noted that students experienced growth, but they always didn't experience an entire year's worth of growth. And sometimes the students that you worked with may have taken 4 months, 5 months, 6 months just to begin to demonstrate progress in that particular area. And so when you think about how to then correlate that to the decision making regarding the number of hours or sessions that a student should receive, let's say hypothetically, if a student from your observation took about 4 months to acquire a certain skill set that he could apply, the utilization of decoding or phonemic awareness, perhaps a total of 4 months or 16 weeks with 1 session per week, which would give you 16 sessions, may be a way of coming up with the recommended number of hours of compensatory services. Or you may find a student who, again, it may have taken 5 months. And again, you can equate that to the number of weeks. And so that takes you up to 20 weeks. And it might mean 20 hours of service that we will want to provide that student, whether it be in reading and or mathematics. There will be instances and you'll have students, because of the severity and nature of their disability, it may have been 6 months or 7 months before they could really begin to demonstrate some evidence of acquiring certain skills. And so you may certainly recommend a number of hours equivalent to those particular amount of weeks that a student takes to achieve a certain goal or objective. But one thing I want you to keep in mind, remember that compensatory services does not mean hour for hour, minute for minute, second for second of the services to be provided. Compensatory recovery services simply means finding a remedy to try to compensate for the loss. Because know this, that the student is receiving instruction during the day. And so since compensatory services is offered beyond the day, the student is having this opportunity beyond the school day to continue to work in those areas that may have been impacted by the loss of direct in-person instruction. As Brenda mentioned, our related service providers have always used the logs and other records that have helped them to make appropriate decisions about compensatory recovery services. And in the area of social emotional, I know that there are some times on the IEP where there might be 30 minutes a week recommended to support a student with their social emotional behavioral needs. And roughly that would equate to about 2 hours of service in a month. And so you could begin to work with the family and to talk about whether or not you want to offer 6 to 8 to 10 sessions of compensatory recovery services. It will be an individualized decision, but I still know there are going to be times in which a parent or an advocate or an attorney may be insistent upon an extraordinary number of hours, 70 hours, 80 hours, 100 hours. And I will tell you, with all of my years of experience, I've never granted that number of hours of service, and I've worked with many of the attorneys and advocates who represent our family members. But if you have that challenge, you can always consult with your area special education supervisor and with the resolution and compliance unit for guidance. We want to support you with these decisions because we know that there are times when it can be challenging. If we go to the very next slide, one of the things that I wanted to share with you is that as Brenda talked about performance matter and shared the data, just take a look at the evidence of learning data on an aggregate level. Look at the impact to our current grade 2 students. Prior to the pandemic, 48.7% of our students were meeting the particular measure or standard for our district. But as a result of the impact of the pandemic and the loss of in-person instruction, we've seen a decrease by 23.3%. So that lets you know that a lot of our students are definitely going to need access to compensatory recovery services in the area of reading. If you take a look at grade 5, you will also see evidence of a decrease. But what's most important is to recognize that you're going to use all of your data to make those decisions about the areas of reading and or mathematics. The next one also shows it specifically in the area of mathematics. So we've had experienced loss at the elementary level. And so it's my hope that with the guidance that you've been given in reference to using the data and the interpretation of how to determine how many hours of service, that this will help you in your decision-making process. So at this point, if we can go to the next slide, we'll see if you have any questions about this particular section.
Dr. Mason, I'm not seeing questions specifically about this section. I know that there was a moment there where the presentation slides were frozen, so we apologize for that, but we're back on track. And I see some questions about the previous section that I know that I will be responding to, or that will be covered in the summary when I go over the steps that folks need to follow. So you'll see that Appendix B again and some of the other documents. So
thank you very much, Phil, for making me aware of that. And we do apologize that it was frozen there for a moment of time, but we hope that you still were able to benefit from the content that was conveyed during that presentation. So we're going to move forward now and talk about the Compensatory Recovery Services data tool. And Julie Hall will also be joined by Derek Rosenberg, who is also one of her tech specialists. So thank you, Julie, for conducting this presentation along with Derek.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. As special educators and related service providers, data collection and accountability are a common practice and are part of our world, and CRS is no different. We began this data collection process last summer, and we want to acknowledge and thank you all for the efforts that you put into entering some of that data. Some staff were unable to enter the data when the Google form was closed at the end of the year, but we're going to address that today. Recently, the Maryland State Department of Education issued a memorandum defining the accountability and data requirements. As a result, a more comprehensive data collection tool was necessary to accurately document the data and efforts that each of you have made with our students with disabilities. So as part of that data collection tool design, the Office of Special Education pulled a data set from MOIP. This data set included approximately about 20,000 students that are preloaded into this data collection tool. From the previous data, we were able to document 2,476 students who were identified as ineligible or the parents had declined services. So now we need to move forward to collect that specific data that the state is asking for us for the remaining of our public school students. Although the final deadline is June 1st, we're required to submit quarterly reports to the state of Maryland to demonstrate our own progress with this task throughout the year. Everyone is going to need to enter data into this tool for their current caseload. Some of you remember that the Google Sheet was closed at the end of the summer and data wasn't entered. So that data still needs to be entered, but you will be entering it for your data set. So how might you get the information if you didn't have the student on your caseload last year? So previously it was stated this information should be documented on PWNs. A lot of that important information should be documented in MOIEP. And we recognize that this is going to take some time. So similar to last time when we started this task, you get paid for the training for the 2 hours that we are with us this evening. And we really appreciate that you are setting aside this time this evening. But in addition to that, you're going to be paid 8 hours with your per diem rate to work on this data entry. So at this time, and no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Derek Ritzenberg, who's actually going to take you through the tool step by step so that you can see what that data entry is going to be required.
All right, thank you, Julie. I'm going to go ahead and introduce a very simple tool that we've created that it's really for case managers to easily track progress. However, if necessary, the tool can be accessed by service providers to enter information for that particular service for the student. So I'm happy to go ahead and introduce our new tool for you. So you're going to receive a link where you're going to click on this link. That's going to look just like this tool right here. And what you're going to need to do is the first thing is to identify your student. So you're going to select Control F. That brings up a search bar at the top right. And for this instance, I'm going to go ahead and put in the student ID number. So as a sample test, I've created a student here. And as you can see, the student's grade, their school, the school contact, that could be the case manager, it could be the, if necessary, service provider. And then go ahead and you're going to click on Google Form on the right side. This Google Form is pre-populated with student information. And so I'm going to take you step by step to complete this very simple process. So for this instance, I'm going to go ahead and select my student. Okay, and this brings up the student information that is pre-populated. So at the very top, the student ID is already there for you, their student name, student last name. The grade, you pull down and just enter the student's grade. Same with the school. School contact, you'll put in the case manager, we'll put in their name, or if necessary, the service provider. And we will select the service that the program that the student is enrolled in. And then finally, it asks, is the student eligible for compensatory recovery services? So if yes, that takes you to the last part where you go ahead and put in the information of the services provided. If no, then it takes you to a submit button where you can go ahead and submit right away. Another option is the CRS was declined by the family and RACU monetary settlement. So if I click yes, I'll go ahead and indicate who's providing. So put school staff member. And these are the different types of services that are provided, and you can select more than one. So let's say that you have instruction by local school system personnel, we have related services by the local school system, and maybe we have some counseling. And then at this point, we're going to go ahead and put in the service hours that we are planning for. So let's say that in the meeting that we plan for 20 math hours. So I'll put a 20 at the top. And then at the bottom, this indicates how many hours were actually received by the student. So we may plan for 20, but let's just say that the student actually received 5 hours. So I'm going to indicate that right here. Now, if you just go below, you'll notice that there's hours for reading planned, reading received, writing received. And there's some open fields here, okay? If there is no reading necessary, then I'll go ahead and just put NA. And these instructions are included with the link, as well as we're gonna have a video that explains step by step, so it's really easy. If by chance you have a numerical value associated at the very top for your planning, let's just say we have 2 here, we will have to have a numerical value at the bottom, at least hours of 0 that was received, okay? But again, if this does not apply, you can just leave these as NA. Okay, and then I'm just gonna go ahead and put some information right here that the student received a couple of these services. Counseling. And I'm just showing you for an example what it looks like on the other end. Okay, so right here it says case managers only. Has the student completed all compensatory recovery services? You can say yes for the fields that we've identified above, or no if we need to add additional services. I'm going to select yes. And once I submit, oh, sorry, I have a field there. This will show that our response has been recorded, and you will receive an email as soon as you submit your responses as a summary email, kind of like a receipt with all of your information that you've typed in. And I'm going to show you what that looks like here. And let's just say that if we had more information to fill out, we can select edit our response, and that brings us back into the fields where we can edit and update. So let's say that we planned for a certain amount of hours, and then the hours were actually given to the student and we want to record the received hours. We can go back, edit, and then put that information back in. But I want to show you what it looks like when you get your receipt response. Okay, so as soon as you hit submit, you'll receive a summary in your Gmail, in your MCPS Gmail that looks just like this. And it has all the information that we've entered, the student ID, their name, the grade, the contact information, but also the services that were provided. Now, again, we're going to look through just to verify that this is all correct. And again, if it's not, at the very bottom, we can actually go back to the form and update that field. So again, we can edit our response. And let's just say at this point, the student actually received, instead of for behavioral services plan 23, let's say the student actually received 10. Okay, so we can go ahead and update these. And again, this is the case manager and if necessary, the service provider. And once they're finished providing all the information for the fields necessary, then again, you can go ahead and submit. Now, I just want to go over a few things about our simple tool here. That number one, once the student is located on the right side of the fields, it'll say that the form is needed and the link is there. But if there is no hyperlink to select, then in that field, it'll say not needed, that a new form is not needed at the time that the student is and services are accounted for. And then, like I mentioned earlier, once you submit, you receive an email of your submission, and you can go ahead and make changes and update that information. Keep in mind that this is a static sheet. So the information of the students and selecting that link that populates the form for you, that will not update that particular sheet that says the students that need a form completed or not. So if a student is not receiving hours for a particular subject, again, we're just writing NA in there if they're not at all receiving those. But if a student is receiving or plans to receive hours for a particular subject, it's important to write in a numerical value for the planned and received section for that field, just so that on our end, we can compile that data and all the data is accurate. Okay, this time I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Julie.
So the following are important dates to remember as it relates to CRS data collection tool. Keep in mind that there's due dates and deadlines followed by blackout periods. So that you'll see that they correspond with a quarterly kind of mark. The data is cumulative, so we would like to see more data as we hit each one of these marks. By June 3rd, 2022 is the deadline for our data collection, in which we will compile all this information and submit that to the state. My office will be compiling that data from those multiple entries. One thing to note, someone may ask, if my case manager enters all this information and then the service provider, I was not able to get the information from them to enter in this form, and they go in to enter that data, how will that affect that student record? So my office will be compiling those two records into one if they are submitted more than once. So you can edit that document over and over and over again, and we're going to be taking care of compiling that information. Next slide, please. Just as a reminder, in any new tool, there's going to be questions, there may be errors. If you find that there's information that doesn't seem to be accurate, we have three amazing gentlemen in my office that have created and worked with this tool, please contact them, send them an email, and they would be so happy to assist you. And at this time, if there's any questions in the FAQ or the Q&A.
So Julie, one question that has come up is, folks want some clarity around the difference between the Appendix B, which is used for the decision-making process for determining eligibility, and the Google form that Derek just demonstrated. So if you want to clarify the difference between those two tools.
So this tool in particular is identifying the key data points that the state of Maryland is requesting. And so these data points will then be used to submit to the state. The Appendix B is a document that resides in MOIEP that's specific to that individual student, and it's a record for that student within MOIEP.
Okay. Some folks have asked whether they are responsible for completing this tool for the students that they served in the past or the students that they currently are serving as case managers.
Thank you. That's a very good question. Though this tool and the data set that they're going to be entering is for their students that they have this year. So it's important to be able to look into MOIEP to see what information may be in prior written notices already so that they can enter that information for their current caseload.
Another question that came up was whether this was relevant for both PEP and school age students.
This particular data set is pre-K through 12. So it is a compilation of all those students directly from active records in MOIEP.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to discuss some of the next steps that need to take place. And this is a bit of a summary for some of the information that's already been shared, including some of the links that were shared earlier. So now that we've discussed the process for considering eligibility, and you've been introduced to the Compensatory Recovery Services data collection tool for documenting the eligibility decision, documenting those services, and the delivery method, we're going to summarize those steps that you need to take to complete the process. So you're going to start by scheduling an IEP meeting or that compensatory recovery parent discussion for those students for whom have not yet had that eligibility determination. I know that there were several questions about whether folks need to go back and redo that eligibility determination. And this is for students who have not yet had that discussion. You're going to take steps necessary to schedule that IEP meeting or that discussion with those parents or guardians. And those would look very similar to any steps that you would take to schedule an IEP meeting or discussion. You're going to use the compensatory recovery discussion script, which is linked here. Derek, you could click on that link for me while I talk. That'd be great. So it's linked in this presentation, and this discussion script will help you with that initial conversation that you're going to have with parents. One of the reasons it's important to rely on this discussion script is in part to ensure what Diana Wiles referenced earlier, which is that we want to make sure that we are saying to all parents that they have an opportunity to have this discussion in the context of an IEP meeting, if that is their preference. This discussion can take place in an IEP meeting that is scheduled for another purpose. For example, the CRS discussion can be added to an annual review or a reevaluation meeting or any other scheduled IEP meeting. It can be added to that discussion. As you engage in the scheduling process, you're going to need to determine if there are any cases that may require the presence of a central office staff member, so you can coordinate that support with your special education area or program supervisor. An example would include a meeting where you've already received information or input from the parent that either an attorney or an advocate will be present at that meeting, and you would like to request that support. Next slide. While scheduling the Compensatory Recovery Services meeting, be sure to communicate with all of the necessary service providers and consider the need for an interpreter or the use of the language line if that's necessary. And in preparation for the meeting, you're going to have to collaborate or need to collaborate with other service providers. It's very similar to the process that you used last year. And the teachers need to complete that Appendix B for the students being considered. You're going to conduct the meeting using that information for the Appendix B. And if that Appendix B is done well, it's really going to guide that discussion that you're going to have with those parents, as well as the questions that Brenda referenced earlier that provide parent input. You're going to make that eligibility determination in collaboration with the other service providers and with input from the parent or guardian. And then you're going to complete that prior written notice document or form using the examples that are linked here in this presentation. There are 2 examples here, one for students who are found eligible and one for students who are not found eligible. You're going to make sure that all the key elements of the prior written notice are completed. This document is the record of this discussion that will be provided to the parents. I'm going to take a look at one of these examples so that we can just highlight some of the key elements so you can make sure that you're completing this in the fashion that gets all that key information. You're going to indicate the type of meeting by selecting other and adding that this is a CRS eligibility meeting at the bottom of page 1. If you could scroll down for me, Derek. And then you're going to describe the actions being taken by documenting if the student was determined to be eligible for compensatory recovery services, and you're going to provide a brief summary of those services. You're going to explain in the next section why this action is being taken by describing the data that was used to make the decision. And this is quite frankly going to be that data that's going to be pulled directly from that Appendix B document that you used earlier. And then you're going to provide a detailed description of what those services look like and how they're being offered. I understand that this sounds like a little bit of redundancy, that you're documenting this information here and then you're putting it on that tool. But the fact is that this is our way to communicate this information to the parent to make sure that we have a clear record and understanding of what was decided. Under the description of the evaluation method, you're just going to list the data measures that were reviewed. And then under other factors on this document, you're going to describe the discussion that took place with the parent and document any agreements or disagreements. If the parent declines or rejects the team's offer, you need to document that and any other relevant information that may have been shared during the discussion. Okay, if you could come back to the slide for me, Derek. The last piece and the bullet on here is that you're going to upload that Appendix B document to make sure that we have a record of the data that was used and analyzed to determine that eligibility. And that will be uploaded to the MOIP profile. Next slide, please. After the CRS meeting or discussion, you'll need to provide the parent with all the relevant documentation within 5 days, just like you would for any IEP meeting. Those documents are going to include that IEP 5-day verification letter, a copy of the prior written notice that we just reviewed, and a copy of the Appendix B. After the determination, you will need to use data, the CRS data collection tool to document the outcomes and the eligibility discussions and those services as recommended. And that data collection tool was just reviewed for you by Julie and Derek. The final step is very important. And this is how we will know that the eligibility determination is made for that student. That final step being the documentation on that CRS data collection tool. I reviewed the key components of the prior written notice document, but I also wanted to give Ms. Wiles an opportunity to add any information. If Diana, if you had any other key pieces of information that you want to chime in on for the completion of that prior written notice document, please jump in.
Thank you, Phil. The only thing that I would add is to stress the importance of documenting very clearly on that prior written notice. In the event that a parent has a dispute with regard to the number of hours of compensatory recovery services or the team's decision not to provide compensatory recovery services, that prior written notice is going to help RACU and the Office of General Counsel to make decisions on how to defend your team's decision. So please follow the template and answer as much as you can, as clearly as you can, so that we can use that information in the event we have a dispute with a parent.
Thank you, Diana. And the fact remains that they may dispute one service but not others. And so please be clear if they are in disagreement about any specific service. But speaking of RACU, there may be times when, if you go to the next slide, we will need to refer cases to RACU for that review to take place at another level. So there may be some circumstances when we need to bring that office into play. These examples include a request for reimbursement for a service that a parent paid for through a private provider, or when there's a request for an additional year of instruction beyond the age 21, or if a parent is requesting access to a service that you feel is outside of the scope of the compensatory recovery service pathways that are going to be described in a few minutes by Mr. Langsam in this training. And lastly, as Julie discussed, the Maryland State Department of Education has established a process for monitoring the progress that we are making as a system through this discussion for all of our students. That one of the primary reasons that we're doing this is to report out that information, but the biggest reason we're doing this is to make sure that we are having this discussion for each and every one of our students. We know that a lot of work was put in last year to have these conversations with some of our key groups of students, and we need to work through that process for all of our students. And in order to do that, we need to complete that data collection tool. Of course, that primary reason is to make sure that students get the services that they need. And it's the expectation that all of these eligibility discussions and determinations will be made by March 31st, the end of the third quarter. At this time, I'm going to show you what the CRS resources look like. Several of you have asked questions about whether you're going to receive copies of this presentation and copies of the resources. We will be sending out through the PDO registration system all of the information that we've shared with you this evening. You'll get a copy of the presentation as well as access to all of the resources that we've shared this evening over the course of the presentation. Okay.
So there's a few questions in the Q&A around the timeline for students. If they had their initial IEP over the summer in 2021, should these parents be included in the discussion for CRS?
So if I understand that question correctly, that those students would have been back in the school setting at the time that they were eligible for special education services. So we'll review that question with our resolution compliance office to make sure that we're providing clear guidance around that, because there may be some consideration or questions around the period of time where the student was suspected for a disability. So I want to make sure we're answering that thoroughly, Julie.
Okay. Another one was, if we've had the discussion around CRS and determined last spring that they need CRS, does an Appendix B now need to be filled out for them?
Yeah, and I saw that question come up several times. So we're not asking you to go back and retroactively have that eligibility determination conversation. The Appendix B, again, is really a tool that's used to prepare for that discussion. So if that conversation or eligibility determination has been made, we're not asking you to go back and retroactively do that.
And the last question's around who's going to provide the services, when they will occur, but that's going to be coming in the next couple.
Well, that is an awesome segue. So I'm going to introduce Mr. Jonathan Langsam, and he is going to talk about the service coordination process. Take it away, Jonathan. You are muted, Jonathan.
That's hilarious because I'm usually really good at that. Thank you, Phil. I'll start over. It's good to see everybody here today. It's my pleasure to be here. My name is Jonathan Langsam. I'm a content specialist out of the Department of Special Education Services. My main role is to assist in the process of delivering our compensatory recovery services to all of our students. If you've worked with me in the past, I've worked on some big projects before, mainly the assessment centers. I want to share that working with families and staff in a different type of setting, providing a service like this, provided me a lot of joy. I really enjoyed the process, and I think the staff that were part of that and the families that participated in that really had a great result and enjoyed the process. It's my intent to bring that same feel to this process as well. That being said, I want to review, we can switch slides now, the coordination of services that we can be offering through Montgomery County. There's different pathways that we can take and different options for students in different situations. So here we have multiple pathways to provide compensatory recovery services. We have what's called our school managed services. We have CRS by appointment. We have the George B. Thomas Saturday School, and we have what's called high dosage tutoring. I'm going to break these down as we go through the presentation and explain how you can access these different types of services, locations, and delivery models. Next slide, please. We'll first talk about school managed. So the term school managed, or providing CRS by a school managed team, is implying that you guys at the school level are able to find providers to implement and manage the services you're identifying for the students in your school or program. This can be done across all our levels, pre-K through 12th grade. When we have providers at the school level, which I'm just going to say now is the preferred method when we can get it in place, it's a more comfortable setting for our students and mainly for our families as well. They have a lot of comfort knowing that the student is at their school with their staff. I also know that in a lot of situations that won't be possible, but I did want to put a plug in there for students receiving CRS on the school level. So this service can be done before and after school by the school staff identified. CRS on the school level can also access one of our regional service centers. So that would be the provider working with the family saying, hey, we can't do it at the school, but maybe we can meet at one of our regional service centers on the weekends. And I'll describe that more as we get on a little bit later. We can also meet a family at a public library in the evening or on weekends. And some of our students are going to need community-based learning. And we can access community spaces identified for that type of learning on weekends, school breaks, and other times that makes sense. When we're talking about school managed, we are talking about all the different subjects, areas of need that we could provide our students pre-K all the way up through high school, transition, and travel. You can switch slides. To make a request for central office CRS, so this is the situation where you're saying as the school team, hey, we need some help. We need help finding providers. We don't have folks on our school staff that are able to do this or ready to do this. We need some help. And we appreciate that situation, and that's why we're here. There's going to be a request to access that help. I'm not going to go into it today, but it's very similar to the form that will be filled out for the decision-making process. It'll be a request form, and you will identify the type of service that you've already worked out with that family on the school level. So on that form, you'll choose, is this CRS by appointment, where I'm matching you with a provider? Are you accessing the George B. Thomas Saturday School, which is a virtual only option that I'll also go into in a little bit? And are we looking at summer 2022 delivery? For some of our families, our students, our providers, it makes a lot of sense to look at next summer as an opportunity to provide CRS. We are building programs and avenues to be successful next summer, and more information on that will come as we continue to develop. We can go to the next slide, please. So CRS by appointment. So you're now in the form and you've been matched with a provider. So once that form is filled out, it comes to a database that we support here in our office, and it shows us what the student needs, and it asks us to find a provider. So if you're working in the system with us in central office, you'll have access to a database, and you'll be able to identify students that you would like to work with on that level. When you're choosing to work with a student by appointment, your options are to work with that student. I didn't put it on here, but the option of working with a student at their school level is available. That's a really rare situation that could be hard to get to, but that is an option. If you're a provider and you're able to get to a student service school, that would be fabulous. You can certainly access one of our regional service centers on the weekends, and again, a public area such as a library, and then also the virtual option. I know many of our students are in this situation because the virtual option didn't allow us to provide the full breadth of the services that we would like to for those students, and students showed regression. But in some situations and cases, the virtual option is going to be an excellent option for students and that family. So we're going to make sure that we have that there as an option to discuss with the family to see if it makes sense. We could switch slides. So you've heard me mention regional service center several times now in this little presentation, and I want to go into details about what this looks like, where they're located, and how you can access the service centers. We currently have 4 service centers we're opening, and we are regionally locating these centers so that providers and families in certain parts of the county will have easier access to those locations. So we've tried to strategically place them or identify them. We have the Little Bennett Elementary School that will support our northern part of the county, students and providers from that area. We have 2 centrally located schools, the Rock Terrace School and the Julius West Middle School. Those are nice centrally located, but sort of opposite sides of Rockville, different access points from the highway and other access roads. We're also looking at the Rock Terrace School as a comprehensive site where we can provide additional supports needed for students that have additional needs. Some of our students might need additional equipment to access instruction. Some of our students might need additional staffing to access instruction. So we will identify the Rock Terrace School as an excellent location to provide some of those extra services or things that our students need to access what we're trying to teach them. So these are our locations. We also have Eastern Middle School, which I didn't mention, is in the other part of the county on the other side of University Boulevard as well. So in this situation, you're a provider, you've been matched with a student, either at the school level or through central office, and you're contacting that family and you're forming a partnership with them. I use the word partnership because I think it is a true partnership in that you're trying to figure out what makes the most sense for the family, for the student, and for the services being provided. And in many of these cases, these services are going to continue for some time. So I like that word partnership because you're going to be connected with this family and with this student probably for some time, not just a brief encounter. With communicating with the family and maybe identifying a service center makes the most sense on a Saturday or a Sunday if we're open. You're going to identify the service center that's most convenient and appropriate for the student needs, but also for access. So we don't want families traveling far to access our centers. We want things comfortable and reasonable, and that includes our providers as well. You know, I would like you as a provider to have it be convenient for you as well. So once you've identified the service center you'd like to access, you will have access to that center's calendar, and you will identify the dates and the times you would like to block off in the rooms for that center. When agreed upon, you'll enter that information into that time block. So you will edit the time block at the service center that you were choosing to access. You will put your provider name, your name, the student name and ID into the chosen time slot. We need you to choose the function this event only, so you don't edit all the events on the calendar for the entire year. If you are scheduling multiple sessions, which I think many of you will be doing, you'll identify those appointment slots and reserve those times as appropriate. So you'll go into each box and you'll block it off as needed, and you can block them off for as many sessions as you need them, as long as there's time slots available for that service. And if the student requires transportation, which some students will, absolutely will, a Google form will be available to submit with the necessary information to access transportation for that student. Most of the fields on that Google form all match what we put on a STAR form. We're working with transportation actively and creating the best way to communicate back and forth and to provide these services for our students. When a request is made, it'll go directly to transportation or contacts there, and it will also come to the CRS office so that not only we are aware of the transportation, but if there's any troubleshooting issues or changes that need to be made, we can support that effort as well from our office. All transportation requests need to be made 10 days in advance. of the transportation needed. If there's a request for multiple weekends up front, we're going to indicate that on the initial request form, and there will be a mechanism to choose all the dates. We'll have all the Saturdays listed for the remaining of the school year that we're open. So that's how you're going to access our regional service centers. If you did work at one of our assessment centers, the process is very similar. We modeled it after that because it worked very well. And so we're really excited to have this option available for our students. Next slide. Oh, I already went to the next slide. All right, I want to now talk about the George B. Thomas Saturday School. This is a virtual only option for our students. And it takes place on Saturdays from 8:30 to 11. And we have a coordinator at the Saturday school that will be helping us coordinate rolling kids into classes and out of classes or with providers. They are limited at the George B. Thomas Saturday School in the services that can be provided. So we're really identifying mainly just academic curriculum for our homeschool model students, our LAD students, and our Learning Center students. And we can service students at the George B. Thomas Saturday School, kindergarten through 8th grade in reading, language arts, mathematics. And if we're looking at high school students, grades 9 through 12, English and mathematics. And there will be opportunities actually on both forms for CRS by appointment, and if you were using the Saturday school, to delineate or choose a specific math level or class that a student might need, such as calculus or trigonometry or the other math classes I never made it to when I was in high school. So you'll have that opportunity to make those selections if you're choosing this option. Another thing I really like about the George B. Thomas option is that it's rolling admission. So a student could be a part of that program for 4 weeks and then come out. And we can roll students in and out as needed. I really like that option when appropriate. We can switch slides. So you will have the option on our form to select summer 2022 delivery. And this is for our pre-K all the way up through 12th grade students. This option is really mainly used when the school team and the family kind of realize that it makes sense to have these services delivered over the summer. Things maybe are too busy during the school year. Some of our students can only handle so much learning at one time and need a break or a different opportunity. So there'll be many situations or discussions in which summer 2022 might make the most sense for the family and the student. And we welcome that. We're currently developing programs and opportunities for next summer. We're in the planning and building stages. So we're not ready for you to offer specific things to our families, but just to give them confidence and let them know that there will be services offered throughout next summer that they can access. We can switch. So transportation. We talked a little bit about requesting transportation for a service center. I want to talk about it overall in general. We are going to be able to make a transportation request at our secondary level schools, middle and high schools, with that same 10 days notice, using the same type of system, but this will be going through your school team, not through the transportation form. So one of the things we can do on the school level is order what's called an activity bus. And an activity bus can come to the school, take a student or a group of students to a community or an area close to where these students might live. That option is available for our students receiving CRS. You would make that request through your office as they would make an activity bus request normally, and we would make sure that's done 10 days in advance. To request door-to-door transportation, we are only offering that at this time for our regional service center. And I did go through the process earlier on how to access that transportation for the individual centers. And if we can move to the provider sign up, it's my favorite slide. This is my pitch. So we have 2 ways to sign up to be a provider for CRS. If you'd like to be a provider at the school level, we have a link to fill out a Google form to get you on our payroll at that level. If you'd like to be a CRS by appointment, matched with a student by our office through a master database, you can sign up to be a provider through this other form for by appointment. And if you'd like to be a provider on both levels, which I encourage, you can fill out each form so that your payroll is correct based on the service you're giving for which student. We need lots of providers, so I encourage you to sign up. And at this time, I want to turn it back over to Dr. Mason so she can discuss our contacts, and maybe we can address a couple of questions as well.
Thank you so very much. This lists all of the contact persons, individuals who certainly presented this evening. And so feel free to contact them if you have any questions. We know that you are working very hard and very diligently every day. We respect you and value you for what it is that you do. And we know that this added responsibility due to the impact of the pandemic upon students with disabilities as directed by the U.S. Department of Education requires us to make this next step. So we want you to contact us if you have any questions or any concerns. Now, based upon the last segment, linked to coordination of services, I'd like to know if you have any questions that we can answer at this time.
So Gwen and Jonathan, there's a question in here that asks about folks who are unwilling or able to provide those services at their school. What type of selection would they make? Do they select centrally managed, or what should they select then?
Yeah,
Jonathan?
so yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, they would select the CRS by appointment option. So like I said, there'll be a specific form that they'll have access to. And they'll go in, and when they fill that out, it lets us know that we need to match a provider for that student from our level or our pool of people.
Another question asks, if we sign up as a service provider at our school, are we expected to provide the services for the entire school, or can we do those students on our caseload?
Excellent question. Really signing up to be a provider at the school level just lets us know that that's the level where you're going to be working, but you absolutely have options with the students that you're going to work with. That's really based on availability. Certainly knowing the student. I love that idea. If you're the case manager for the student and you're also able to provide the CRS, I think that's a comfortable situation for that student, and I welcome it. But you are not tied into any amount of students to work with or any particular student to work with.
Another question asks, if they want to be a provider, but they're pretty limited, I guess, in terms of the car. It looks like the school managed option would be a possibility. Would they be able to provide the service virtually?
So like, he's kind of said earlier, most of our students are not going to benefit from a virtual option based on the decisions that were made to bring the CRS to play. But when it does apply, absolutely. It's a partnership with the family, but it's also a discussion with the team and what makes sense for the child. Some of our students, the virtual option is not going to be an option. But for some of our students, it may be an option and it can be explored. So if you're limited and that's the way you can provide a service, maybe we can match you with a student that fits in that kind of situation for you.
I'd like to also add to that response that Jonathan gave. As you know, one of our pathways is the high dosage tutoring / intervention model. We in the Office of Special Education have collaborated with the Office of Curriculum and Instructional Programs. And you know that that model is a virtual model, although it is an opportunity for access to instruction before school, during school, or after school. And as you very well know, with compensatory services, it has to be beyond the school day. And so we know that sometimes on an individualized basis, working virtually with a student can work. So you have to look at it very carefully, but we are encouraging also access to that particular pathway as well.
Dr. Mason, there was one last question I'm going to loop back to Ms. Hall regarding the use of that CRS data collection tool to help us make sure we have clear data around the students that have already been determined eligible or provided services. I responded to the question that folks do not need to go back and revisit that eligibility discussion. But Julie, can you clarify the role that that tool might play in helping make sure we have good information about the students that have already been determined eligible?
Well, thank you, Phil. So if the conversation's already had and even possibly the services have already been provided, you still need to go into that new tool to document that information. There's been cases when there needs to be a correction to previous information. Previously, it may have been selected that the school base was going to provide the services, but now that, you know, that is no longer an option. We need to update that information. You would use the new tool to enter that information, and that is going to be our primary data source. So we'll be pulling that information to document the way and the type and the amount of services for anyone that's eligible.
Thanks, Julie. And Dr. Mason, I know that we will be following up, responding to all of these questions as one of our resources in an FAQ. So that's it, I think, for the questions.
Well, thank you so very much to all of our participants this evening. It has been a joy for us to share this information with you. I want to reiterate that we want to support you through this process. We are available to you, and we want you to know that you can reach out to any of us with your questions. We want to thank you again for what you do for students with disabilities each and every day.